When you are doing these fancy stitches on your sewing machine, some of the stitches are pretty involved, and I wanted to show you what I do sometimes. This stitch is pretty involved, and when you come down into this lower section, it gets all tangled up sometimes with all these parts coming out. So I switched over about here into just a regular blanket stitch. And then when I got to where I was back up, where I thought I could handle it, I went back to the stitch that I had been using. And the same thing on this stitch right here. This stitch isn't that involved, but when you get to a little tiny pointy corner, sometimes I thought, oh, it's hard to know where things are going. So I just used a regular, just a straight stitch. And so when I got to, this is where I finished. When I got to the end, I just straight stitched it up to the pointy corner. Here's another place down here. So that's what you can do when you have stitches that might be a problem. You just try to change them out before you get to the problem area and find another stitch that's close, similar, that you can substitute in. This block demonstrates some of the things that I think about when I'm doing decorative stitches. For one thing, I wanted to show you this stitch that goes around the outside of the balloon is a rather large stitch that if it comes down here, that it doesn't work really well. So what I did here was when I got to the bottom, I just put in a satin stitch that was, I think, about 3 wide by 0.35 in length. And I've been doing that on most all of them so that I can use this satin stitch along the bottom also. Then this stitch is a nice stitch. It has a straight line, and it goes like down in here and then pops out on the outside. Sometimes stitches work really well. You don't have to do too much about them. This one worked really well all the way around the outside. The stitch on the center was, again, it has a center line that comes down, so it's easy to guide where you're going. And on this one, I think I may have, when I got up, well, maybe not. When I got up here, there's like 4 stitches between X's. So I could come up here 1, 2, and then come down here 1, 2, and then it worked out fine. If it doesn't look like it's going to work out nicely, then you might have to find another stitch that will work. Take a look at this guy. These big pointy things are great, and they go right along the edge, and this is smaller than my default stitch, so it's getting too big when it comes down to the very bottom. So what I did was, when I get to this one, I see how big, and I don't want to go farther, I switched over on my machine to a similar stitch, which is just a straight stitch that goes forward and then backward, and then forward, and then goes forward, backward, forward. On my machine, it's a number 6, and I tried to make it about the same size. I started out with a size 3 length, and then I thought, no, up here, this is kind of short for a 3, so there I may have made it a 2. So to me, it's okay to switch stitches as you get to places where there's a little pointy spot or something, because if you try to use one of those big old stitches there, it's going to get all over the place. Now, when you're first starting out, it's okay. But once you have used these stitches enough, you kind of think, okay, I will put a little tricky other stitch in there to make it work better. Okay. I'm getting back towards the starting place. I'm watching what's coming next. And this looks like a pretty good place to stop. So I'm going to take one stitch and then pull my needle up, pull the piece away from the machine, clip the threads, and then I'm going to take an easy thread or needle and pull my threads, put my threads through the eye of it, and stick it down to the back of this piece. Now, if I always check to make sure they all came back, and they didn't, so now I gotta get this one to come back. Oftentimes you can pull the thread from the other side. Alright, so when you have all the threads on the back, then I just tie them in a knot. You can also feed them if you want. Feed them through the stitches, but for my purposes, tying them in a knot will hold them well enough until we clip them off. And our stitches are all finished on that one section. Ready to move on.